Halloween night. Rain slams against Gotham like it's trying to wash the city clean. It can't. A masked figure watches from the shadows while a mayor laughs under bright lights, unaware that death is already in the room. Heavy breathing, tape stretching tight. And then? Silence. Gotham's elite fall one by one, each crime scene marked with a riddle addressed to a single name. Batman. 2 years into the cowl, Bruce Wayne is more vengeance than man. He moves through darkness like it belongs to him, jaw clenched, eyes hollow. But this killer isn't afraid. He's hunting the corrupt, and he wants Batman to understand why. The question is, how does he know so much? The mayor's blood is barely dry when the next envelope arrives. Thick paper, handwritten, to the Batman. Inside, a cipher. And a thumb drive. Batman stands in the crime scene, rainwater dripping from his cape onto polished floors. Flashing red and blue lights bounce off the lenses of his mask. He doesn't flinch. Commissioner Gordon watches him from across the room, half ally, half liability. Trust in Gotham is thin. Paper thin. Back in the cave, the cipher flickers across massive screens. Symbols. Patterns. A taunt. Bruce removes the cowl, and for a moment he looks young. Tired. Human. This is bigger, he mutters. The Riddler isn't just killing, he's exposing something buried deep inside Gotham's foundations. Then the drive plays. A video. The mayor, bound and terrified. The Riddler's voice, calm, almost gentle, asks about a word. Renewal. Bruce freezes. Renewal was his father's legacy. Renewal. The word echoes in the cave like a gunshot. Thomas Wayne built his campaign on it, promised to save Gotham with it. Billions poured into a fund meant to lift the city out of decay. Bruce grew up believing it was hope carved into stone. But the Riddler's video keeps playing. The mayor sobs, mascara running, as the masked figure leans close. "Where did the money really go?" he whispers. No rage, just certainty, like a teacher correcting a child. Bruce's jaw tightens. This isn't random. It's surgical. Another body drops days later, the police commissioner. Then the district attorney, each scene louder than the last. Bomb callers. Public chaos. Crowds screaming as phones record everything. Gotham isn't just afraid, it's awake. At the funeral, Bruce stands in daylight, exposed without the cowl. Cameras flash, reporters shout. And through the crowd, he sees a boy same age he was when his parents died, clutching his mother's hand beside a fresh coffin. The past punches him in the throat. Then a car explodes into the church. Smoke. Fire. A man stumbles out with a bomb strapped to his chest, begging for help. The Riddler has a message for Batman, and it's ticking. The timer blinks red against the man's chest. 5 minutes. His eyes are wild, desperate. "Please," he gasps. He said, "only you." Batman steps closer. Sirens wail outside the cathedral. Smoke burns the air. Gordon shouts for the bomb squad, but the hostage shakes his head violently. "No police. He'll detonate it." A phone is taped to the device. It rings. Batman answers. The Riddler's voice spills through, distorted but steady. "Hello, Vengeance," almost playful. "Let's see how much you care about the truth." A riddle. Always a riddle. If Batman solves it, the man lives. If he fails. Bruce's mind races, symbols clicking into place. But the answer leads somewhere impossible. A rat. You are El Rata Alada. The bomb explodes anyway. Flames swallow the corridor. Batman shields the blast with his body, thrown backward into stained glass and ash. When the smoke clears, the hostage is gone. So is any illusion that this is just about corruption. That night, under flickering neon, Batman corners Penguin at the Iceberg Lounge. Fists fly. Glass shatters. Engines roar through rain-slicked streets in a chase that tears the city open. Metal screams. Cars flip. And in the wreckage, Penguin laughs. "You're looking for a rat?" he coughs. "Try the one closest to you." Bruce doesn't respond, but inside, something fractures. Because if renewal was a lie, if his father's name is tied to all of this, then the Riddler isn't just attacking Gotham, he's attacking Wayne. Bruce stands in the cave staring at an old campaign photo. Thomas Wayne smiling. Confident. The word Renwall blazing behind him like a promise carved in light. Alfred's voice cuts through the silence, low and careful. "Your father wasn't perfect, Master Bruce, but he believed in this city." Believed. Past tense. Secret surface fast. A reporter digging into Martha Wayne's history. A threat made in desperation. A crime boss silenced soon after. Falcone, the same name whispered in every alley Batman has ever bled in. Bruce feels it in his chest, tight, suffocating. If his father asked Falcone to protect their family, if that protection led to murder, then everything Bruce built his mission on fractures. I am not him, he tells himself. But the doubt lingers. He confronts Alfred. Anger spills out, raw and unfiltered. You lied to me. Alfred doesn't defend himself. He just stands there, wounded in a way that has nothing to do with fists. I wanted to protect you, he says softly. Then the hospital explodes. Glass rains down. Smoke swallows corridors. Alfred lies beneath concrete and flame, barely breathing. Bruce pulls him free with shaking hands, the weight of almost losing the only family he has crushing harder than any punch. Across the city, the Riddler watches from behind a screen. His plan is unfolding perfectly. The lies are exposed. The powerful are falling. And now, a final act approaches. Because the next target isn't hidden in shadows, it's Gotham itself. Arkham. Cold walls. Fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped insects. The Riddler finally sits behind glass, mask removed, eyes wide with something worse than madness. Devotion. You came, he whispers when Batman steps into the room. Not fear. Not hatred. Admiration. Bruce feels it instantly. Wrong. Deeply wrong. You're part of this, Riddler says, leaning forward, chains clinking softly. We exposed them together. The corrupt. The liars. We're the same. No. The word pounds in Bruce's skull. But memories flash. Criminals beaten in dark alleys. Fear weaponized. Vengeance delivered without mercy. The line between justice and obsession suddenly feels razor thin. Riddler starts to sing, soft at first. Ave Maria, his voice cracks into hysterical laughter. You didn't figure it out, did you? It was never about just them. Outside, vans roll into position. Anonymous followers. Inspired. Armed. Explosions rip through the seawall. Water crashes into Gotham like Judgment Day. Streets vanish beneath black waves. Power dies. Screams rise from the dark. This wasn't about killing the elite. It was about rebirth. And now, trapped in a flooding arena packed with terrified civilians, the Riddler's disciples raise rifles toward the mayor-elect. Batman drops from the rafters into chaos. Gunfire erupts. Water surges through the arena steps, ice-cold and merciless. People scream, clawing over seats, over each other. Gunshots crack from the rafters. One by one, Riddler's followers chant the same word as they fire. Vengeance. Batman hears it, and it hits harder than any bullet. He launches forward. Smoke grenades burst. Darkness swallows the shooters. He moves through it like a shadow with a heartbeat. One thug falls, then another. But a sniper locks onto the mayor-elect below, finger tightening. Batman doesn't think. He jumps. The shot rings out. Pain tears through his side as he slams into her, shielding her with his body. For a second, everything is muffled. Water rising. Blood warm against cold fabric. He forces himself up, injects adrenaline, keeps fighting. When the last gunman drops, the arena is drowning. Batman looks at the terrified faces around him. Not criminals, not corrupt officials, just people. A flare ignites in his hand, bright red against the flood. He wades into the water, lifting it high. Follow me, he says, voice no longer growling vengeance but steady. Human, they do. Outside, dawn bleeds over a broken city. Helicopters pull survivors from rooftops. Bruce stands apart, watching the sun fight through clouds. Gotham isn't saved, not really, but it's still breathing. He understands now. Fear alone won't heal this place. Vengeance creates more vengeance. The symbol has to mean something more. In the rubble, a child grips his hand, won't let go. Batman squeezes back. And for the first time, he isn't just a warning in the dark, he's hope. He stepped into Gotham like a rumor. Not a superhero yet, a shadow testing its own edges. And when Warner Brothers handed Matt Reeves the keys to one of pop culture's most guarded kingdoms, the expectation wasn't just another Batman movie. It was reinvention. Reeves wasn't the obvious choice at first glance. Before donning the cowl by proxy, he built his reputation on intimate, character-driven spectacle. Cloverfield proved he could weaponize chaos through handheld immediacy. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes showed something more important. He could make digital creatures feel painfully human. That film, in particular, revealed his obsession with interior conflict heroes at war with themselves long before they fight anyone else. That's the filmmaker Warner Brothers entrusted in 2017 after Ben Affleck stepped away from directing duties on the project. And here's where the pivot becomes crucial. For nearly a decade, Batman on screen had been filtered through Christopher Nolan's grounded realism and then Zack Snyder's mythic bombast. Two extremes. Reeves rejected both. He didn't want a god. He didn't want a soldier. He wanted a detective. That creative North Star shaped everything. Reeves has spoken openly about his childhood fascination with the character, not as a power fantasy, but as a wounded young man constructing meaning from trauma. That perspective is baked into The Batman, 2022. This isn't Bruce Wayne at the height of control. It's year 2. He's still figuring it out. Still angry. Still reckless. The suit isn't polished iconography. It's functional armor. The Batmobile isn't sleek luxury. It's a muscle car that growls like it barely trusts its driver. The film's noir DNA didn't emerge accidentally. Reeves drew heavily from 1970s paranoid thrillers. The French Connection, Chinatown, All the President's Men. Films where institutions rot from the inside and truth comes at a personal cost. Gotham, under his lens, isn't a backdrop. It's systemic decay made visible. Rain-soaked streets, sodium vapor lighting bleeding into shadows, corruption not as twist, but as atmosphere. And that tonal commitment required studio faith. The reported production budget hovered around $185 to $200 million, a massive investment for a 3-hour detective story wrapped in a superhero label. Warner Brothers, under the DC Films banner, wasn't just funding a tentpole. They were betting that audiences would embrace a slower, moodier, almost procedural take on a character traditionally sold through spectacle. Reeves's creative approach leans auteur-driven but deeply collaborative. He didn't treat the film like a franchise obligation. He treated it like a character study that happened to involve capes. His longtime partnerships, particularly with cinematographer Greg Fraser and composer Michael Giacchino, became extensions of his thematic intent. He's known for immersive prep work, creating detailed backstories and emotional frameworks before cameras roll. Actors weren't stepping into archetypes. They were stepping into psychological ecosystems. What makes Reeves's vision distinctive is restraint. Think about it. In an era where superhero films sprint toward multiverse expansion and quip-heavy pacing, he stretches silence. He holds on faces. He lets scenes breathe in discomfort. The opening monologue alone, Batman narrating over fragmented glimpses of crime signals, a different rhythm. More internal, more obsessive. He also resisted over-explaining the mythology. There's no origin montage, no pearls hitting pavement. He assumes you know the trauma. Instead, he explores its aftermath. Bruce Wayne, as a man who hasn't yet learned that vengeance without hope creates monsters of its own. That thematic thesis, vengeance versus justice, anchors the film's emotional trajectory. And then there's the boldest decision of all, making Gotham the protagonist's mirror. Reeves described the film as an examination of what happens when a city and its vigilante reflect each other's rage. Crime isn't just something Batman punches, it's something he inadvertently inspires. That philosophical tension elevates the film beyond genre mechanics into moral inquiry. Reeves's Batman doesn't glide, he stomps. You hear him coming. The heavy boots echo down corridors before criminals even see him. It's horror language, slasher framing. The idea that fear itself is his weapon. That's not accidental. Reeves understood that Batman, stripped of gadgets and lore, is fundamentally about psychological warfare. But ambition invites risk. A nearly 3-hour runtime for a brooding detective noir could have alienated casual viewers expecting traditional superhero fireworks. Reeves didn't compromise. He leaned further in. Long investigative sequences, cryptic riddles, emotional introspection over punchlines, and somehow, impossibly, it coheres. Because at its core, Reeves's vision isn't about spectacle, it's about identity. Who is Bruce Wayne when the mask comes off, and what if the mask is the only version of him that feels real? That question lingers in nearly every frame. The result is a Batman film that feels less like a comic book adaptation and more like a psychological crime saga that happens to feature one of fiction's most enduring icons. It repositions the character not as a symbol of invincibility, but as a man still learning what that symbol should mean. But vision alone doesn't build a film. An idea, however bold, needs architecture. And the blueprint for this brooding reinvention was forged in years of scripting, revisions, and narrative recalibration that reshaped The Dark Knight from the ground up. The blueprint for the Batman didn't arrive fully formed. It was dismantled and rebuilt before it ever reached a soundstage. When Matt Reeves officially took over writing duties in 2007, sharing screenplay credit with Peter Craig, he inherited a project that was initially conceived as a continuation of the Ben Affleck-era Batman. What emerged instead was a narrative reset. Same mythology, different lens. Reeves made an early, decisive choice. This would not be an origin story, but it would feel like one emotionally. Bruce Wayne is already 2 years into his vigilante career, yet psychologically he's still at square one. That framing allowed the screenplay to explore growth without retreading familiar territory. No training montages, no League of Shadows exposition, just a man mid-mission discovering that his mission may be flawed. The writing process reportedly stretched over months of meticulous development. Reeves is known for constructing extensive character biographies before drafting dialogue. That method shows. The script treats Gotham not as backdrop, but as ecosystem. Crime families, politicians, law enforcement, all entangled in a web of generational corruption. The mystery at the center isn't a simple whodunit, it's a systemic autopsy. And here's the structural gamble. Reeves leaned into noir detective tradition rather than superhero escalation. The narrative unfolds like a procedural thriller. Clues lead to riddles. Riddles lead to revelations. Each discovery peels back another institutional layer. The influence of classic crime fiction, particularly the Zodiac-style serial killer investigation model, is unmistakable. The Riddler isn't written as a flamboyant trickster. He's constructed as an ideological extremist using puzzles as propaganda. That tonal recalibration required discipline in dialogue. Listen closely and you'll notice something. Characters rarely over-explain. Conversations feel clipped, functional, almost wary. Bruce speaks more in voiceover than in public interaction, and even that narration feels like a journal entry, obsessive, fragmented, searching for coherence. It's less heroic proclamation and more internal monologue from a man who doesn't sleep. Structurally, the screenplay follows a 3-act framework, but stretches its midpoint in unconventional ways. The second act doesn't build toward a single explosive confrontation, it builds toward moral destabilization. When Bruce uncovers the extent of Gotham's corruption and his family's potential ties to it, the conflict turns inward. The mystery becomes personal. That pivot is essential. Without it, the film risks becoming a stylish but emotionally distant crime saga. Thematically, vengeance versus hope drives the script's architecture. Early on, Batman identifies himself as vengeance. It's not branding, it's identity. But the story carefully deconstructs that self-definition. Every escalation of violence spawns unintended consequences. Criminals fear him, yes, but so do civilians. And eventually, extremists interpret his brutality as validation. The Riddler sees Batman not as adversary, but as inspiration. That narrative mirroring is the screenplay's sharpest blade. Reeves and Craig also made a bold choice in pacing. At nearly 3 hours, the script refuses compression. Scenes linger. Investigations unfold in real time. In a genre conditioned for rapid-fire plot beats and quippy exposition, this deliberate tempo risks audience impatience. Yet that slowness serves immersion. You feel the exhaustion, the rain, the procedural grind. Gotham doesn't unravel quickly because corruption rarely does. Adaptation-wise, the script pulls selectively from comic arcs like The Long Halloween, Year One, and Ego, but it never becomes a direct translation. Instead, it absorbs tone and thematic DNA. The Long Halloween's mob-centric crime structure echoes in Carmine Falcone's presence. Year One's grounded realism informs the police dynamics. But Reeves isn't recreating panels. He's translating sensibilities. There were also narrative recalibrations during development. Early reports suggested a more expansive rogues gallery. The final script narrows focus. Penguin exists, but as a rising lieutenant rather than primary antagonist. Catwoman operates as emotional counterweight rather than romantic subplot. This restraint prevents villain overcrowding, a common franchise pitfall, and allows thematic clarity. Perhaps the most daring writing decision is the ending's emotional thesis. Without diving into full spoiler territory yet, the climax shifts from confrontation to revelation. Batman realizes fear alone cannot sustain a city. The script reframes heroism not as domination, but as guidance. That evolution feels earned because the screenplay patiently built to it. No sudden epiphany, just accumulation of consequence. And while critics later debated the runtime, The script's ambition lies in its refusal to simplify. It treats superhero mythology with the seriousness of crime literature. It trusts audiences to follow breadcrumbs without constant reassurance. But a screenplay, no matter how meticulously constructed, is still theory on paper. Words waiting for faces. Archetypes waiting for embodiment. And the next critical step, perhaps the most controversial of all, was deciding who would step into the cowl and carry this fragile reinvention on his shoulders. Before a single frame was shot, the internet had already decided the film would fail. Not because of the script, not because of the director, because of one name, Robert Pattinson. When Warner Brothers began casting for this new iteration of Bruce Wayne, the mandate was clear: younger, vulnerable, unpolished. This wasn't the battle-hardened veteran of The Dark Knight Rises or the warehouse-brawling titan of Batman v Superman. This was year two, a man still bleeding internally. Reeves needed an actor who could project intensity without dominance, someone whose stillness carried volatility. Pattinson had quietly spent the decade after Twilight dismantling his teen idol image. Films like Good Time and The Lighthouse proved he was drawn to damaged, obsessive men spiraling towards self-destruction. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. Reeves reportedly wrote early drafts of the script with Pattinson in mind, even before formal casting began. He saw in him the haunted quality essential to this version of Bruce. The backlash was immediate. Social media erupted with skepticism, memes, outright hostility. But here's the irony: that resistance mirrored the film's central theme: a man underestimated. A symbol dismissed before proven. The casting itself became a meta-narrative. Warner Brothers conducted extensive screen tests in 2019. Pattinson reportedly tested in the Batsuit alongside Zoe Kravitz, who was simultaneously auditioning for Selina Kyle. Chemistry mattered. This version of Batman wasn't emotionally isolated by design, it was isolated by dysfunction. The dynamic with Catwoman had to feel organic, tense, lived in, not glossy. Kravitz's casting carried its own weight. She had circled the role years earlier but was deemed too urban during the Christopher Nolan era, an industry phrase that aged poorly. This time, Reeves wanted complexity. Her Selina isn't femme fatale first, she's survivor first. Casting her brought grounded sensuality without caricature, more street-level realism, less comic book wink. Then there's Paul Dano as the Riddler, a quietly inspired choice. Dano has built a career playing men who simmer before they explode. Watch There Will Be Blood. Watch Prisoners. His performances often hinge on intellectual intensity masking emotional fracture. That energy fits Reeves's reimagined Riddler perfectly, a serial killer who believes he's exposing truth, not cackling, calculating. Colin Farrell's casting as Oswald Cobblepot initially puzzled audiences, largely because he was unrecognizable beneath prosthetics. That transformation, handled by makeup artist Mike Marino, became a statement in itself. This penguin wasn't slick or aristocratic. He was grimy, mid-level mobster climbing the ladder. Casting Farrell signaled the character would be textured, not theatrical. Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon might be the film's most quietly revolutionary decision. Gordon has often functioned as exposition machine or moral anchor. Wright brings weary intelligence. His collaboration with Pattinson's Batman feels less like hero and sidekick, and more like two detectives working different angles of the same broken system. Casting him reframed the relationship from hierarchical to collaborative. Andy Serkis stepped into Alfred's shoes, an actor synonymous with performance capture, now playing a flesh-and-blood paternal figure. Serkis's history with Reeves on the Planet of the Apes films built immediate trust. Their Alfred isn't merely butler or mentor. He's guardian carrying guilt, watching a boy he raised turn himself into a weapon. The ensemble philosophy here is restraint. No overcrowded rogues gallery, no stunt casting for headlines. Each actor fits the tonal architecture Reeves constructed. Nobody feels imported from another cinematic universe. That cohesion matters. And let's talk physicality. Pattinson trained extensively in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and boxing, not to bulk into superhero enormity, but to move with grounded aggression. His Batman fights like someone who learned in alleys, not monasteries. Brutal, direct, less choreography, more impact. That grounded combat style required an actor comfortable embracing vulnerability rather than invincibility. What's fascinating is how many A-list names reportedly circled the project early in development before Reeves shifted direction. This wasn't about star power, it was about alignment. He needed actors willing to disappear into tone rather than dominate it. The result is a cast that feels unified under a singular vision. Casting a character as iconic as Batman is always high risk. Audiences bring decades of expectation into the theater. But Reeves wasn't chasing nostalgia. He was building something intimate inside something massive. Because ultimately, casting isn't about who looks good in the suit. It's about who understands what the suit costs. And once those actors stepped onto set, the theoretical choices on paper transformed into lived performances, raw, internal, sometimes uncomfortable. That's where the film either collapses or transcends, and in this case, it transcends. The first time you see him fully in motion, stepping out of the shadows during that subway beatdown, you understand the gamble paid off. Robert Pattinson doesn't play Batman like a billionaire slumming it in vigilantism. He plays him like a man who has nothing else. No life outside the mask, no identity beyond the mission. And that distinction reshapes the entire performance. This Bruce Wayne is emotionally stunted, almost feral in his isolation. Pattinson leans into stillness as a weapon. His jaw tightens instead of speeches swelling. His eyes do the work. Watch the way he studies crime scenes. Head slightly tilted, gaze unfocused yet calculating. He isn't performing dominance. He's absorbing chaos. That restraint makes the rare explosions of violence feel less like spectacle and more like release. Physically, Pattinson's Batman fights with blunt force efficiency. No theatrical flourish. Punches land heavy. He takes hits. He stumbles. You feel impact. That vulnerability is crucial. Previous iterations often presented Batman as near mythic in combat. Here, he's durable but not untouchable. Bruises linger, breath shortens, the suit protects him, but it doesn't erase consequence. That human fragility grounds the mythology, but the real performance lives in the voiceover. The internal narration could have veered into parody noir cliches, gravelly introspection. Instead, Pattinson delivers it like diary entries written at 3 a.m., equal parts obsession and doubt. There's a searching quality in his cadence, as if he's trying to convince himself the mission makes sense. I am vengeance isn't triumph. It's self-definition on shaky ground. His Bruce Wayne persona, when forced into public, is deliberately undercooked. Hair hanging in his face, eyes ringed with exhaustion, minimal effort at charm. This isn't billionaire playboy as performance art. It's a man who hasn't bothered constructing the mask of Bruce yet. Some viewers found that choice jarring. I think it's the point. The dual identity hasn't fully formed. Batman is real. Bruce is the costume. Zoe Kravitz matches that internal intensity with something more fluid. Her Selina Kyle moves differently, lighter, watchful, always calculating exits. Where Pattinson's performance is clenched, Kravitz's is coiled. Their chemistry doesn't explode, it simmers. Shared glances carry subtext. A rooftop conversation becomes negotiation, attraction layered over distrust. She sees through him faster than he's ready for. Kravitz avoids caricature entirely. Her Selina isn't femme fatale fantasy, she's navigating survival. The vulnerability in her scenes involving her friend Annika adds emotional grounding. When she confronts corruption, it isn't ideology, it's personal. That distinction keeps the performance from drifting into comic book exaggeration. She feels rooted in this Gotham, scarred by it, shaped by it. Paul Dano's Riddler operates on a different frequency altogether. Most villains in superhero cinema chase scale. Dano chases intimacy. His menace comes from proximity, heavy breathing behind a mask, eyes wide with conviction. When the mask eventually comes off, what's left isn't a criminal mastermind towering above the hero. It's a lonely extremist desperate to be understood. That choice reframes the conflict from physical duel to ideological fracture. Dano reportedly stayed in character during intense scenes, isolating himself between takes to maintain psychological tension. You can feel that method approach on screen. His interrogation scene opposite Pattinson crackles not because of shouting, but because of misalignment. The Riddler believes they're partners. Batman realizes he's created something he doesn't recognize. Two mirrors, one horrified by the reflection. Colin Farrell's Penguin could have been seen stealing excess. Instead, he injects sly opportunism. Beneath the prosthetics, Farrell crafts a mid-tier operator clawing upward. The humor he brings, particularly during the interrogation sequence where he mocks the hero's Spanish translation blunder, cuts tension without breaking tone. It's character-based levity, not franchise quipping. Jeffrey Wright's Gordon anchors the emotional realism. His performance is all contained frustration and ethical fatigue. Watch his body language around superiors, measured, cautious. Around Batman, more direct. Their partnership feels earned because Wright never plays him as starstruck or subordinate. He's a cop navigating compromise in a system that punishes integrity. And then Andy Serkis's Alfred. Their hospital scene, quiet, restrained, reveals the emotional fracture beneath Bruce's armor. Pattinson lets the mask slip just enough. Anger masking fear, regret hiding beneath accusation. It's not melodrama, it's unresolved grief resurfacing. What makes these performances cohere is tonal alignment. Nobody drifts into camp. Nobody underplays the stakes. Reeves demanded immersion, and the cast commits fully. You believe this Gotham exists because its inhabitants behave like people shaped by consequence. This isn't the most physically imposing Batman ever put to screen. It might be the most psychologically exposed. Pattinson doesn't portray certainty, he portrays evolution. A man starting in vengeance and inching painfully towards something resembling hope. And that emotional authenticity would mean little without a world convincing enough to contain it. A Gotham constructed not just through dialogue and performance, but through texture, architecture, and visual decay that feels almost tangible. Before a single punch lands, before a single riddle is solved, Gotham tells you everything. It's suffocating, wet, decaying from the inside out. And that isn't accidental. It's production design operating at narrative level. Production designer James Chinlund, reuniting with Matt Reeves after War for the Planet of the Apes, approached Gotham not as fantasy metropolis, but as urban pathology. Instead of sleek skyscrapers or gothic exaggeration, this city feels layered architecture, stacked from different eras, political promises built over forgotten foundations. You sense generational rot in the bricks. That texture grounds the film's noir ambitions in something tactile. Most of the film was shot in the United Kingdom, primarily at Leavesden Studios, with location work in Liverpool, Glasgow, and London standing in for Gotham's streets. Liverpool's neo-Gothic and brutalist structures provided natural density real-world decay that no soundstage could fully replicate. Watch the wide street shots closely. The grime isn't decorative, it feels lived in. Wayne Tower itself abandons corporate gloss. Instead of a gleaming modern skyscraper, Bruce resides in a converted Gothic structure, almost cathedral-like in its scale. High ceilings, cavernous halls, darkness swallowing space. It mirrors his psychological state, vast, empty, echoing. This isn't a billionaire flaunting success, it's a recluse hiding in inherited stone. The Batcave follows the same philosophy. Gone is the high-tech showroom aesthetic. Reeves situates it in an abandoned train terminal beneath the tower. Concrete pillars, damp walls, industrial lighting. It feels assembled, not designed. Functional screens, wiring exposed. You believe this version of Bruce built it himself piece by piece. That DIY texture reinforces the Year 2 premise. Color palette plays a crucial role. Reds dominate neon signage, flare-lit climaxes, emergency lights bleeding into darkness. Red becomes thematic shorthand for rage and corruption. But it's never clean red. It's smeared, reflected through rain, distorted by glass. Cinematically, it's closer to 17 than traditional superhero vibrancy. Costume design, led by Jacqueline Duran, avoids flamboyance. Batman's suit looks assembled from military-grade materials. Visible stitching, reinforced chest plate, utility over elegance. The cowl's sharp angles give him a predatory silhouette, but nothing gleams. It absorbs light. Even the eye makeup left visible when the mask comes off adds realism. No magical disappearing eyeliner, just smudged exhaustion. Selina Kyle's wardrobe communicates evolution. Early outfits feel practical, muted, almost anonymous. As her agency increases, the lines sharpen. When she dons the full Catwoman look balaclava stitched from fabric rather than sculpted latex, it feels improvised, survival-driven, not yet iconic but becoming. Penguin's look tells a story too. Grease-slicked hair, ill-fitting suits, jewelry that tries too hard. He's reaching for status he hasn't earned. The prosthetic work transforms Colin Farrell, yes, but the costume sells the ambition. You see a man clawing upward through aesthetics alone. One of the film's most striking design choices is the Iceberg Lounge. Instead of neon carnival absurdity, it's grounded decadence. Velvet textures, low ceilings, oppressive intimacy. The club feels like a pressure cooker. Corruption thrives in dim light. The repeated hallway tracking shots leading into the lounge become visual ritual, descending into Gotham's bloodstream. And then there's the mayor's crime scene in the opening act. Holiday decor still hanging. Blood-staining, cheerful surroundings. Production design juxtaposes festivity and horror, underlining the film's thesis. Decay hides behind celebration. Gotham smiles for cameras while bleeding privately. What elevates Chinlun's work is cohesion. Every location, every prop, every scrap of wallpaper feeds the same tonal ecosystem. You never feel transported between wildly different aesthetic philosophies. Even large-scale sequences, like the flooded arena finale, maintain grounded physicality. Water feels heavy. Structures feel unstable. Chaos has weight. Reeves insisted on as much practical construction as possible, minimizing over-reliance on digital environments. Sets were built extensively, giving actors physical space to inhabit. That decision impacts performance. When Pattinson moves through corridors, the echo is real. When Kravitz climbs scaffolding, the height exists. Tangibility translates. Gotham, in this iteration, doesn't feel stylized for comic book flair. It feels diseased. And that disease informs every character choice. The city isn't something Batman protects from outside. It's something he's trapped inside. World-building in superhero cinema often aims for spectacle. Here, it aims for immersion. You don't admire Gotham, you endure it. And once that physical world is established, once the sets breathe and the costumes absorb shadow, it becomes the cinematographer's canvas. Because production design builds the skeleton, cinematography gives it pulse. The first time the bat signal cuts through the sky in this film, it doesn't feel triumphant. It feels ominous. A warning flare rather than a beacon of hope. That tonal inversion begins with Greg Fraser's camera. Fraser, fresh off Dune and already known for his work on Rogue One and Zero Dark 30, approaches Gotham like a war photographer trapped in a noir nightmare. He and Reeves chose to shoot digitally on the ARRI Alexa LF, paired with vintage anamorphic lenses that soften edges and bloom light sources. The result? Images that feel both modern and weathered. Clean resolution wrapped in grime. Anamorphic framing, with its wider 2.39:21 aspect ratio, stretches Gotham horizontally. Streets feel endless. Interiors feel crowded. Characters often occupy the far edges of the frame, dwarfed by architecture. That compositional choice reinforces isolation. Batman isn't centered like a traditional hero. He's frequently swallowed by shadow, barely distinguishable from the environment he haunts. And then there's the lighting. Low-key. Heavy contrast, faces half-lit, half-lost. Fraser leans hard into chiaroscuro, the dramatic interplay between light and darkness borrowed from Renaissance painting. In interrogation scenes, practical light sources, lamps, flashlights, neon signs motivate every glow. Nothing feels artificially polished. Shadows aren't decorative, they're narrative. Watch the crime scene sequences. The camera moves slowly, almost cautiously, often handheld but controlled. You feel proximity, you feel breath. Instead of sweeping crane shots announcing scale, Fraser keeps us at eye level. Detective perspective. We search for clues alongside Batman. The cinematography doesn't just show investigation, it implicates us in it. One of the film's most striking visual motifs is red saturation. The opening mayor murder scene bathes in cold blue, but as the story escalates, red infiltrates frame after frame, flare-lit corridors, emergency lights reflecting off water, neon bleeding into rain. Red becomes emotional shorthand. Rage, corruption, revelation. By the time Batman guides civilians through floodwaters holding a red flare, the color has transformed from threat to fragile hope. The Batmobile chase sequence might be the film's most technically audacious achievement. Instead of clean, geographically clear action, Fraser and Reeves opt for chaos. Rain lashes the lens. Headlights streak across frame. The camera mounts low to the ground, attached to vehicles, vibrating with impact. You don't watch the chase, you endure it. Flames from an overturned truck flicker in slow motion as Batman emerges upside down in frame. A horror film resurrection image. Pure cinematic iconography. And here's what makes that sequence resonate. Restraint elsewhere. Because the film avoids constant spectacle, when it unleashes velocity, it hits harder. The visual language up to that point has conditioned us to patience. So when momentum erupts, it feels earned. Fraser also embraces negative space. In multiple scenes, Batman stands almost entirely swallowed by darkness, only the faint outline of the cowl visible. Criminals peer into black hallways expecting nothing, and then he steps forward. The absence of light becomes weaponized suspense. It's slasher framing filtered through superhero myth. Depth of field plays a crucial role too. Backgrounds often blur into abstraction, isolating characters in shallow focus during emotionally charged moments. When Bruce confronts Alfred in the hospital, the sterile whites dissolve behind them. All that exists is strained intimacy. The technical choice serves emotional immediacy. Digital cinematography sometimes risks clinical sharpness. Fraser avoids that by embracing texture rain, constantly falling, smoke drifting, particulate matter catching stray beams of light. Atmosphere becomes character. Gotham breathes because the air feels thick. Camera movement remains purposeful. Slow push-ins during interrogations heighten tension without theatricality. Lateral tracking shots through corridors build rhythm. Rare, wide establishing shots remind us of scale only when necessary. The discipline is evident. No movement for movement's sake. There's also a subtle homage embedded in the visual grammar. The rain-soaked urban decay recalls David Fincher's Seventeen. The surveillance paranoia echoes 1970s thrillers. Yet Fraser doesn't imitate, he synthesizes. The film feels contemporary while drawing from cinematic history. Perhaps the most poetic visual in the entire film arrives during the flooded arena finale. Batman, once framed as shadow, now carries a flare, leading civilians through darkness. The camera holds wide enough to capture bodies moving in unison behind him. He's no longer stalking from corners, he's visible. The shift in lighting mirrors the shift in ideology. That's cinematography functioning as character arc. But images alone don't create immersion. They need sound to vibrate against. They need music to pulse beneath them. Because what the camera captures, the score amplifies. And in The Batman, the audio landscape doesn't just support mood, it defines it. The first four notes hit like a warning siren dragged through molasses. Done, 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 done. Michael Giacchino's main theme for The Batman doesn't soar, it stalks. Giacchino, a longtime collaborator of Reeves, composed the score before filming began, a rare move for a blockbuster of this scale. Reeves played the theme on set during takes, allowing the rhythm of the music to shape performance and camera movement. That decision matters. You feel cohesion between image and sound because they were born in conversation, not stitched together in post-production. The central motif is deceptively simple, a minor key progression built around repetition and weight. It's not heroic in the traditional John Williams sense. It doesn't lift you, it presses down. Four notes that feel inevitable. That musical minimalism mirrors Bruce's psychological state, obsessive, looping, unresolved. And then there's the tempo, slow, deliberate, almost dirge-like. Giacchino resists percussion-heavy bombast for much of the runtime. Instead, low brass and strings dominate, creating a sense of looming presence. The theme doesn't announce Batman as savior, it frames him as consequence. Contrast that with Selina Kyle's motif. Softer, slithering strings, a hint of sensuality layered over melancholy. It's subtle enough that you might not consciously register it, but emotionally it registers. Her theme carries longing, an undercurrent of escape beneath survival instincts. When her music intertwines briefly with Batman's, the harmony never fully resolves. They orbit each other musically the way they do narratively. The Riddler's sonic identity shifts into something far more unsettling. Giacchino weaves in choral elements, haunting, almost liturgical voices that suggest twisted righteousness. The choice of Ave Maria as a recurring motif tied to the character is particularly unnerving. A hymn associated with purity repurposed as a murder signature. It's sacred turned sinister. But score is only half the equation. The sound design, supervised by Will Files and Douglas Murray, deepens immersion in ways that often go unnoticed until you pay attention. Take the Batmobile. It doesn't purr like luxury engineering. It growls. Engine revs echo like caged thunder. Before it even appears on screen during the Penguin chase, you hear it, a mechanical predator clearing its throat. That auditory buildup transforms the vehicle into character. Fear travels through sound before image confirms it. Footsteps matter too. Batman's boots land heavy, deliberate. In early crime scenes, criminals scan empty darkness, and all you hear is that echoing stomp approaching. It's horror grammar again, sound creating anticipation before reveal. Silence becomes tool. Space between footsteps stretches tension. Reeves often strips scenes of non-diegetic score entirely, letting environmental audio dominate. Rain hitting pavement, distant sirens, electrical hum from flickering lights. That restraint amplifies realism. When music finally enters, it feels intentional rather than constant. The nightclub sequences showcase layered audio mixing. Muffled bass bleeds through walls before we see the iceberg lounge interior. Once inside, music distorts slightly depending on camera placement. Diegetic sound shifting with perspective. It's subtle spatial awareness that keeps the world grounded. And then there's the interrogation scene between Batman and the Riddler. Notice how the score pulls back almost completely. What remains? Breath. Fabric shifting. Fluorescent lights buzzing. Every micro sound becomes magnified. When Giacomo finally reintroduces musical tension beneath their ideological clash, it feels invasive, like dread seeping under a door. The flooded arena climax offers the film's most transformative sonic moment. Amid chaos, gunfire, collapsing structures, rushing water, the music shifts. The main theme, once oppressive, softens as Batman leads survivors with a flare. The orchestration opens slightly. Hope edges in, not triumphant, not victorious, just possible. Sound mixing plays a crucial role here. Dialogue remains grounded, almost understated, even during spectacle. Explosions don't drown emotion. Instead, the mix prioritizes human breath and panic within catastrophe. It keeps scale intimate. What makes this audio landscape remarkable is discipline. Giacchino could have delivered wall-to-wall grandeur. The sound team could have leaned into superhero maximalism. They didn't. They built atmosphere through restraint and repetition. The theme lingers long after credits roll because it's constructed like obsession. Simple, unyielding. 4 notes that refuse to let go. And when music, sound, and silence align this precisely with visual intent, the production itself becomes a living organism, which makes what happened behind the scenes during filming, amid global shutdowns and delays, all the more extraordinary. Because bringing this brooding symphony to life wasn't smooth. It was interrupted, halted, tested, and nearly derailed by forces no one could script. In March 2020, Gotham went dark. Principal photography for the Batman began in January 2020 in the UK, with an ambitious schedule stretching across multiple large-scale sets and city locations. Then, the world shut down. COVID-19 halted production just weeks into filming. Sets sat empty. Release timelines evaporated. For a film already betting on mood and meticulous craftsmanship, the interruption could have fractured momentum. Instead, it reshaped the process. Reeves used the shutdown as enforced incubation. Rather than rush back blindly, he revisited footage already captured, refining tone and recalibrating pacing in his head. When production resumed in September 2020, safety protocols transformed the set into something closer to a sealed laboratory. Reduced crew density, regular testing, compartmentalized departments. The intimacy of those conditions, strangely, aligned with the film's claustrophobic aesthetic. Then another obstacle. Robert Pattinson tested positive for COVID-19 shortly after filming restarted, pausing production again. Delays mounted. The release date shifted from June 2021 to October 2021, and eventually to March 4, 2022. For a blockbuster of this scale, each delay meant financial pressure. Marketing recalibrations. Industry speculation. But here's the twist. Time became ally rather than enemy. Extended post-production allowed Reeves and editor William Hoy to sculpt the film with surgical patience. The nearly 3-hour runtime wasn't studio indulgence, it was deliberate rhythm. Scenes breathe because they were allowed to. Editorial pacing resists the contemporary blockbuster trend of hypercompression. You feel duration. Investigation takes time. Emotional realization takes longer. The Batmobile chase sequence, one of the film's technical centerpieces, required extensive practical stunt coordination. Instead of leaning heavily on CGI previsualization, Reeves prioritized physical vehicles performing real maneuvers. Stunt drivers executed high-speed sequences on wet pavement-controlled chaos that demanded precision. The camera rigs mounted low to the chassis captured raw vibration that digital smoothness would have sterilized. The flooded arena finale presented its own logistical mountain. Massive water tanks, elevated platforms, complex lighting setups to maintain visual continuity under shifting reflections. Safety teams monitored every step. When Batman carries that flare through chest-deep water, the weight you sense isn't imagined. It's physical resistance. Colin Farrell reportedly endured hours in the makeup chair daily to transform into Penguin. Prosthetics require discipline, not just for application, but for performance endurance under latex and adhesive. Farrell leaned into it, using the physical restriction to inform Cobblepot's posture and gait, limitations becoming tools. Zoe Kravitz trained extensively for fight choreography, emphasizing agility over brute force. Her combat style contrasts Batman's grounded brutality, quicker, more evasive. That distinction wasn't accidental. Stunt coordinators built individualized movement vocabularies for each character, physical storytelling extending beyond dialogue. Reeves' directing style on set leans immersive. Actors have described him as deeply collaborative but precise. He doesn't bark instructions, he calibrates tone. If a scene drifted too theatrical, he'd pull it back. If emotion felt underplayed, he'd gently push deeper. That tonal consistency across months of interrupted production speaks to leadership stability. Visual effects integration remained intentionally restrained. While digital environments enhanced cityscapes and extended sets, Reeves avoided green screen over-reliance during intimate scenes. Actors interacted with tangible spaces whenever possible. That decision preserves performance authenticity. Eyelines feel natural because they had something real to land on. Even marketing evolved carefully. The first teaser trailer debuted at DC Fandom in August 2020, while filming was still incomplete. It featured only about 25% finished footage. And yet, the response was electric. Nirvana's "Something in the Way" underscored brooding images of Pattinson's Batman, reshaping public perception almost overnight. Skepticism softened into curiosity. By the time the film premiered in March 2022, anticipation had matured rather than burned out. The extended gestation created mystique. The delays, instead of signaling instability, reinforced ambition. Production adversity often exposes fault lines. Here, it fortified cohesion. Cast and crew weathered uncertainty together. The tone of isolation on screen mirrored the isolation many experienced off-screen during lockdowns. That shared emotional context seeps into the film's atmosphere. Loneliness feels authentic because, in many ways, it was. When the Batman finally arrived, it wasn't just another franchise installment. It felt labored over, tested, refined under pressure. But ambition and craftsmanship mean little without audience response. Studios measure success in numbers: opening weekends, global totals, profit margins. And for a 3-hour brooding detective noir released in a still-recovering theatrical landscape, the commercial stakes were enormous. The question wasn't just whether it would succeed. The question was how. A 3-hour noir detective story released in early 2022, still in the shadow of a global pandemic, was not the safest commercial bet. Superhero fatigue whispers were growing louder. Theatrical attendance hadn't fully rebounded. And this wasn't a brightly colored crowd-pleaser. It was rain-soaked, brooding, almost oppressively atmospheric. And yet, when the Batman opened on March 4, 2022, it didn't just perform, it roared. The film debuted domestically with an opening weekend of $134 million in the United States and Canada. For context, that marked one of the strongest pandemic-era openings at the time and the second biggest domestic debut since theaters began recovering. Globally, it launched to approximately $258 million in its first weekend. Those numbers matter, not just as bragging rights, but as proof that audiences were willing to show up for a darker, slower burn interpretation of a character they thought they already understood. The reported production budget hovered between $85 and $200 million, with marketing costs likely pushing the total investment significantly higher. That means profitability required sustained legs, not just a front-loaded superhero surge. And here's where things get interesting. The film held remarkably well. In its second weekend, it dropped around 50% domestically, a strong hold for a blockbuster of that scale, especially given its lengthy runtime limiting daily showtimes. Word of mouth clearly played a role. Audiences weren't just sampling it, they were recommending it. By the end of its theatrical run, the Batman grossed over $770 million worldwide, with roughly $369 million domestic and over $400 million internationally. In a pre-pandemic landscape, those numbers might have seemed solid, but not seismic. In 2022, they signaled confidence in theatrical experience, particularly for character-driven tentpoles. Warner Brothers, the Maulers, had taken a calculated risk. release exclusively in theaters rather than day-and-date streaming, a strategy the studio had experimented with in 2021. That exclusivity paid off. The film eventually moved to HBO Max after a 45-day theatrical window, drawing strong streaming engagement as well. Commercially, it also reignited Batman as a standalone box office force outside the shadow of Nolan's trilogy. Comparing it directly to The Dark Knight, which surpassed $1 billion globally in 2008, isn't entirely fair given inflation and differing market conditions. But the comparison matters symbolically. Reeves's film didn't need to eclipse Nolan's numbers to validate itself. It needed to prove that a grounded, director-driven Batman could thrive again. It did. International performance underscored the character's enduring global appeal. The UK, Mexico, and Australia emerged as particularly strong territories. Even in markets where superhero saturation had begun to plateau, the film's noir angle offered differentiation. Merchandising and ancillary revenue further expanded its footprint. While not as toy-driven as some superhero properties, given its darker tone, the film fueled renewed interest in graphic novels like The Long Halloween and inspired spin-off development. HBO Max quickly greenlit a Penguin-centered series starring Colin Farrell, signaling studio confidence in the world Reeves built. Financial success also reshaped Warner Bros.' DC strategy. Amid corporate restructuring and shifting leadership within DC Films, later DC Studios, The Batman stood as proof that standalone, filmmaker-led visions could coexist alongside broader cinematic universes. It wasn't entangled in multiverse crossovers. It didn't tease 10 future projects mid-credits. It focused inward and still delivered outward impact. There's also the runtime factor. At 176 minutes, exhibitors often worry about reduced daily screenings limiting box office potential. Fewer showtimes per day typically means ceiling constraints. The fact that The Batman overcame that hurdle suggests strong per-screen averages and repeat attendance. Audiences committed to the experience. Critical audience metrics supported that momentum. The film earned an A cinema score respectable for a darker take on a mainstream superhero. Post-track audience ratings reflected strong positive responses, particularly among younger male demographics, but also with broader appeal than skeptics predicted. Commercially, The Batman wasn't just a hit, it was a recalibration. It demonstrated that tone doesn't have to be homogenized for mass appeal. That patience can pay off. That atmosphere can sell. But numbers tell only half the story. Financial validation answers whether people showed up. It doesn't answer how they felt once the lights came up. And the critical conversation that followed wasn't just about box office. It was about legacy, expectation, and where this new Dark Knight fits within decades of cinematic history. Because success invites scrutiny. And scrutiny, in this case, sparked one of the most fascinating cultural debates Batman has faced in years. Critics didn't just review The Batman, they dissected it. Upon release, the film landed with strong critical approval. On Rotten Tomatoes, it held in the mid-80% range among critics, while Metacritic reflected generally favorable reviews in the low 70s. Solid numbers. But what mattered more than the percentages was the tone of the conversation. This wasn't dismissed as another franchise obligation, it was treated as cinema. Many critics praised the film's commitment to noir atmosphere and detective storytelling, something long promised in Batman adaptations but rarely explored this fully. Reviews frequently highlighted Greig Fraser's cinematography and Michael Giacchino's brooding score as elevating the material beyond genre expectation. The phrase crime saga appeared more often than superhero flick. That distinction matters. Robert Pattinson's casting, once controversial, quickly became a focal point of reassessment. Early skepticism turned into near-universal acknowledgement that he brought something distinct to the role: less swagger, more psychological fracture. Several critics noted that his interpretation leaned closer to Kurt Cobain melancholy than billionaire bravado. That tonal shift didn't divide audiences as much as some predicted. It intrigued them. But the reception wasn't unanimously glowing. Runtime emerged as the most consistent critique. At 176 minutes, some reviewers argued the second act sagged under investigative repetition. Others countered that the deliberate pacing was integral to immersion. The divide wasn't about quality, it was about patience. Do you want your Batman operatic and swift, or methodical and brooding? Paul Dano's Riddler sparked another debate. Many praised his unsettling serial killer reinterpretation, particularly the interrogation scene's emotional volatility. Yet some viewers felt the character lost mystique once unmasked, shifting from calculated mastermind to fragile extremist. That tonal transition was intentional, but intention doesn't guarantee universal acceptance. And then came the inevitable comparison discourse. Every new Batman must wrestle with Nolan's shadow. The Dark Knight trilogy remains culturally dominant. Heath Ledger's Joker looms large in villain conversations. So critics inevitably asked, where does Reeves's vision rank? Here's the fascinating part. The conversation wasn't about superiority. It was about difference. Nolan's films interrogated chaos versus order on a geopolitical scale. Reeves shrinks the focus to urban rot and personal ideology. One is epic, the other, intimate. Comparing them becomes less about hierarchy and more about flavor. Audience reception mirrored that complexity. IMDb scores hovered strongly in the 7.88 Dano range, reflecting widespread approval. Social media buzz leaned heavily into aesthetic appreciation. Rain-drenched screenshots, flare-lit silhouettes, Batmobile engine clips circulating endlessly. Something in the Way, by Nirvana, experienced a streaming resurgence after the trailer and film's release, embedding the movie deeper into pop culture consciousness. The film also sparked renewed discussion about what audiences want from superhero cinema. After years of interconnected universes and quippy tonal consistency, the Batman felt self-contained. It didn't wink at the audience. It didn't rush toward crossover. That seriousness resonated with viewers craving tonal diversity within the genre. Award season attention, while not dominating above-the-line categories, recognized the film's craft. It earned Academy Award nominations in technical fields, including Best Sound, Best Visual Effects, and Best Makeup and Hairstyling. That acknowledgement reinforced its status as a production achievement even among voters who may not typically gravitate toward superhero narratives. Culturally, the film entered discourse beyond entertainment. Its portrayal of online radicalization through the Riddler's followers touched a nerve in a post-2010s world shaped by digital extremism. Critics pointed out the unsettling realism of anonymous communities weaponizing grievance. Gotham's corruption didn't feel abstract. It felt familiar. Cosplay communities embraced Pattinson's stripped-down suit design. Fan art flourished. The phrase, "I am vengeance," re-entered mainstream lexicon, not as meme alone, but as thematic thesis. Long-term reevaluation is already underway. Some viewers, initially resistant to its pacing, found deeper appreciation on repeat viewing, particularly through streaming platforms where the runtime feels less intimidating. Others maintain it could have trimmed 15-20 minutes without losing potency. Both reactions coexist. What's undeniable is this: the Batman reignited conversation. Not just about the character, but about tone, authorship, and the elasticity of superhero storytelling. And that conversation leads naturally to the final question, the one that lingers after box office numbers fade and review aggregates settle. What does this film mean? Because beneath the rain, beneath the riddles, beneath the heavy boots and red flares, lies a meditation on vengeance, identity, and whether fear can ever build something lasting. And that's where legacy begins. At its core, the Batman isn't about stopping a villain, it's about redefining a symbol. Strip away the rain, the riddles, the engine roars, and what you're left with is a man who mistakes vengeance for purpose. That's the film's central thesis. Bruce begins the story believing fear is enough. Criminals tremble when they see the signal. He calls himself Vengeance. Mission accomplished, right? Not even close. The film methodically dismantles that belief. Every punch he throws creates ripples he doesn't anticipate. The Riddler doesn't see Batman as an enemy. He sees him as proof. Proof that rage works. Proof that institutions deserve punishment. That ideological mirroring is the film's sharpest insight. When Bruce watches extremists inspired by his brutality, there's no triumphant music cue, just realization. He didn't just fight monsters. He validated them. That shift from vengeance to responsibility is subtle but seismic. By the time we reach the flooded arena finale, Batman's physical posture changes. Earlier, he emerges from shadows to intimidate. Now, he steps into light to guide. The flare in his hand reframes everything. Red once symbolized anger and corruption. Here, it becomes fragile hope cutting through darkness. Think about that image. A hero leading civilians, not fighting villains, carrying light instead of absorbing it. That's evolution rendered visually. Thematically, the film wrestles with identity fragmentation. Bruce Wayne barely exists outside the suit. When confronted about his family's legacy and potential moral compromise, he doesn't collapse outwardly, he internalizes. Pattinson plays Bruce as someone who never finished grieving, trauma calcified into obsession. The mask isn't disguise, it's refuge. And that raises a larger question. Can a symbol built on fear ever transform into something constructive? Reeves suggests yes, but only through self-awareness. Batman doesn't abandon fear entirely. Gotham is still corrupt, crime still festers. But the film argues that fear without compassion curdles into extremism. Justice requires presence, visibility, humanity. There's also a broader cultural undercurrent. The Riddler's online followers, anonymous, radicalized, united by grievance, reflect modern digital ecosystems. The film doesn't sermonize, but it observes. Isolation breeds ideology. Echo chambers weaponize anger. Gotham's decay isn't just structural, it's informational. Compared to other superhero films of its era, the Batman feels almost defiantly introspective. While cinematic universes expanded outward, multiverses, cameos, escalating spectacle, Reeves went inward. Character first, atmosphere second, franchise third. That hierarchy may define its legacy. Where does it sit in the pantheon of Batman adaptations? Nolan gave us mythic escalation. Burton gave us gothic operatics. Snyder leaned into deified brutality. Reeves delivers noir introspection. None cancel the others. They coexist as tonal experiments across decades. What distinguishes the Batman is its willingness to let its hero fail ideologically before he succeeds symbolically. Is it flawless? No. The runtime tests patience. Certain investigative loops could tighten without sacrificing theme. The final act's scale risks momentarily drifting toward traditional blockbuster excess. But those imperfections stem from ambition, not complacency. The film aims high and mostly hits. Rewatchability depends on what you seek. If you crave kinetic spectacle and relentless pacing, this might feel heavy. If you appreciate atmosphere and character evolution, it deepens with repetition. Details emerge. Visual motifs sharpen. Performances reveal layers. And perhaps that's its quiet triumph. It respects the audience's intelligence. It trusts you to sit in shadow before it offers light. Looking ahead, its influence may already be unfolding. Studios observing its success might feel emboldened to greenlight director-driven interpretations within established IP frameworks. Standalone vision over mandatory connectivity. Tone as differentiator, not liability. But legacy isn't just industry impact, it's emotional residue. When the credits roll, what lingers isn't a punch or a twist. It's that final voiceover. Bruce acknowledging that the city needs more than fear, that he must become more than vengeance. Growth. Painful. Incomplete. Ongoing. That's what makes this iteration compelling. He's not fully formed, he's becoming. And in a genre often obsessed with invincibility, there's something quietly powerful about watching a hero learn. So here's the verdict. The Batman stands as one of the most psychologically coherent interpretations of the character ever put to screen. Not because it reinvents mythology wholesale, but because it refocuses it. It strips away spectacle until only intent remains. A detective story about a man investigating his own symbol. Dark, patient, earnest, and far from finished. Legacy isn't built on opening weekends. It's built on endurance. And what the Batman ultimately secures is not just a successful reboot, but a tonal foothold for what the character can be in the 21st century. Matt Reeves didn't try to outdo what came before. He sidestepped it. Instead of escalating scale, he deepened psychology. Instead of expanding mythology, he narrowed focus. That decision alone reshapes the franchise conversation. For decades, Batman has oscillated between two extremes, operatic spectacle and stylized camp. Reeves charts a third path, procedural introspection, a crime saga wearing a cape. And that distinction gives the film unusual staying power. It doesn't hinge on surprise twists or universe-shattering reveals. It hinges on character evolution. Look at how the film ends. Not with domination, not with victory laps, with rebuilding. Gotham is flooded. Systems are broken. Batman doesn't stand above the city, he walks among its people. The final image isn't triumph. It's responsibility. That reframing matters because it positions this version of the character as unfinished, becoming, not being. That sense of incompletion is powerful. It promises growth without cheap sequel bait. Yes, spin-offs are in motion. Yes, Reeves is developing a follow-up film. But narratively, the Batman stands on its own. It doesn't rely on mid-credit teases to validate itself. It earns continuation through thematic momentum. Culturally, the film also arrived at a moment primed for it. Audiences were emerging from global isolation. Institutions, political, social, informational, were under intense scrutiny. Trust felt fragile. Reeves's Gotham, riddled with corruption and online extremism, didn't feel escapist. It felt adjacent to reality, not literal, emotional. That alignment gives the film resonance beyond genre. The Riddler's digital followers aren't fantasy exaggeration. They echo real-world radicalization pipelines. The film doesn't preach solutions, but it interrogates symbols. What happens when anger becomes aesthetic? When vengeance becomes identity? When a figure meant to deter crime inadvertently inspires it? Heavy questions for a blockbuster. And yet, the film never loses sight of intimacy. The Bruce-Alfred dynamic adds generational texture. Selina's arc injects grounded survival stakes. Gordon's quiet integrity offers contrast within systemic rot. These human anchors prevent the themes from drifting into abstraction. Visually, it leaves behind imagery that already feels iconic. The upside-down shot of Batman walking away from a burning wreckage. The flare-lit procession through floodwaters. The bat signal piercing rain like accusation. These aren't disposable franchise frames. They linger. Now, let's address the inevitable ranking conversation. Is it better than The Dark Knight? That depends on your metric. Nolan delivered operatic moral chess. Reeves delivers psychological excavation. Ledger's Joker remains culturally seismic. Dano's Riddler is more intimate, less mythic. Bale's Bruce mastered duality performance. Pattinson explores emotional incompletion. They serve different appetites. But here's the more interesting takeaway. The Batman doesn't need to dethrone previous iterations to justify itself. It expands the character's cinematic vocabulary. It proves Batman can exist in multiple tonal ecosystems without collapsing under comparison. From an industry standpoint, the film reinforces the viability of filmmaker-driven blockbusters. In an era dominated by interconnected storytelling and algorithmic pacing, Reeves slowed down, and audiences followed. That creative courage might be its most lasting contribution. It also subtly repositions hope as something earned rather than assumed. In many superhero narratives, optimism is baked in. Here, it's fought for. The transformation from vengeance to guidance isn't flashy. It's incremental, hard-won. That arc feels emotionally honest. If there's a critique to carry forward, it's this. Ambition sometimes edges into indulgence. A tighter edit could have preserved momentum without sacrificing depth. But even that critique underscores seriousness of intent. The film dares to linger. So where does that leave us? With a Batman who feels human again, not untouchable, not fully formed, not yet the polished symbol etched into cultural memory. Instead, a man wrestling with the consequences of his own myth. And that might be the boldest choice of all. Because superheroes often represent ideals already achieved, the Batman represents an ideal still under construction. Darkness as starting point. Light as aspiration. A detective story about corruption that ultimately becomes a story about accountability. And in that quiet shift from fear to responsibility, the film earns its place not just as another adaptation, but as a meaningful chapter in an evolving legend. If Batman is becoming rather than being, then we have to go deeper into what he's becoming from. Because the Batman is, at its core, a trauma study disguised as a crime thriller. This Bruce Wayne is not healed. He's not even coping. He's suspended in unresolved grief that calcified into identity. Most superhero origin stories treat trauma as ignition fuel. Tragedy happens, purpose forms, hero rises. Clean arc, efficient mythology. Reeves rejects that compression. Here, trauma lingers. It stagnates. Look at how Bruce inhabits space. He doesn't relax into rooms. He occupies corners. He stands still longer than comfort allows. When others speak, he doesn't respond quickly. He absorbs, processes, with a delay that feels emotional rather than intellectual. Pattinson plays him like someone who never learned how to metabolize pain, only how to weaponize it. And here's the subtle genius. Batman isn't a mask hiding Bruce. Bruce is a mask hiding Batman. Previous interpretations emphasized duality. Public playboy, private vigilante. This version hasn't built the public persona yet. He barely pretends. When he attends the mayor's funeral, he looks like he wandered in accidentally. Disconnected. Untethered. The social performance of wealth doesn't interest him because identity has fused entirely with vengeance. That's not confidence. That's avoidance. The journal voiceover reinforces this. It's obsessive, almost compulsive. He documents nights as if recording proof of existence. There's a fragility in the narration, not theatrical brooding, but searching self-definition. I am vengeance isn't a declaration of power. It's an attempt at coherence. Think about that psychologically. When trauma goes unresolved, individuals often construct rigid identities to create stability. Bruce's rigidity is vengeance. Simple, direct, binary. Crime exists. I punish it. Clean equation. No emotional ambiguity. But the Riddler destabilizes that equation, because the Riddler also constructed identity from grievance, also turned pain into mission, also believes he is correcting systemic injustice. When Bruce realizes they are ideologically adjacent, not identical, but parallel, the film lands its most unsettling blow. He isn't horrified by the Riddler's violence, he's horrified by the resemblance. That interrogation scene isn't about catching a criminal. It's about identity fracture. Dano's Riddler screams with ecstatic recognition. Pattinson's Batman recoils. The performance isn't loud, but you can see the collapse happening internally. The foundation cracks. And once that crack forms, the entire narrative shifts. Notice how Bruce's posture changes in the final act. Earlier, he moves like impact is the goal. Later, he moves like direction matters. When he injects himself with adrenaline mid-fight, a controversial moment, it visually represents regression, a flash of pure rage, brutality unfiltered. The film shows us what unchecked vengeance looks like. It's ugly, and then comes the flood. Water in storytelling often symbolizes cleansing, rebirth, destabilization of foundation. Gotham literally collapses under the weight of accumulated corruption. Structures fail. The old order drowns. And Batman, this avatar of fear, must choose what kind of symbol he becomes in the aftermath. Here's what's extraordinary. He doesn't win by defeating the Riddler physically. The real victory is ideological separation. He refuses to remain vengeance. When he lifts the flare and guides civilians through water, he's doing something he hasn't done all film, leading without intimidation. There's no growling monologue, no violent punctuation, just presence. Hope is quieter than fear. That shift matters beyond character arc. It reframes masculinity within the superhero genre. For decades, Batman adaptations have leaned heavily into stoicism equaling strength. Emotional repression as cool detachment. Reeves allows vulnerability to be evolutionary rather than weak. Bruce admitting he must become more is not a diminishment of power. It's maturation. And maturation is messy. He doesn't suddenly smile more. He doesn't solve Gotham. He doesn't transform into charismatic billionaire overnight. The evolution is incremental. That restraint makes it believable. Trauma recovery isn't cinematic. It's slow recalibration. Even visually, the lighting shifts. Early Batman emerges from blackness. Final Batman walks through diffused light, partially visible. The cinematography mirrors psychological transparency. So what is he becoming? Not a savior? Not yet. A steward. A symbol that understands symbols can misfire. And that might be the most modern interpretation of Batman we've seen. In an era where icons are dissected instantly, where online narratives mutate rapidly, where anger travels faster than nuance, a hero learning to recalibrate his own message feels culturally aligned. This isn't a story about defeating evil. It's a story about understanding influence. And once you see that layer, the entire film reframes itself. The detective plot becomes scaffolding for introspection. The villain becomes catalyst rather than endpoint. The flood becomes metaphor, not just spectacle, which raises the next question. One that extends beyond Bruce Wayne entirely. If Batman is a symbol under construction, what does that say about Gotham itself? Because cities, like heroes, reflect the values projected onto them. And Gotham, in Reeves's hands, isn't just corrupt, it's complicit. If Gotham is complicit, then the Batman becomes more than a character study. It becomes urban diagnosis. This version of the city isn't just corrupt at the top, it's structurally diseased. Politicians lie. Police take bribes. Crime families operate in daylight. But the film makes a sharper point. Corruption survives because systems normalize it. Nobody believes change is possible, so nobody demands it. That's why the Riddler resonates inside Gotham. Not because he's right, because he's articulate about rot people already sense. Reeves frames the city almost like a living organism with a failing immune system. Institutions meant to protect it are infected. The Renewal Fund, a program designed to uplift, becomes a money-laundering pipeline. The irony is brutal. Hope rebranded as exploitation. Charity turned into control. And here's where the film gets uncomfortable. Batman, in his early form, functions similarly. He believes he's cleaning the streets, but he's operating symptomatically. Punching criminals doesn't address infrastructure. Fear suppresses behavior. It doesn't repair cause. The detective framework of the story reinforces this. Every clue leads upward, not outward. The deeper Bruce investigates, the less random crime appears. Everything traces back to systemic compromise. Gotham isn't chaotic. It's organized corruption masquerading as disorder. That shift in perspective matters. In many superhero narratives, cities are backdrops, playgrounds for heroism. Here, Gotham shapes behavior. It manufactures villains. It radicalizes the lonely. It incentivizes moral shortcuts. Even good cops like Gordon operate within contaminated systems. Visually, notice how rarely we see sunlight. The city exists in perpetual damp twilight. Rain doesn't cleanse, it saturates. The grime never washes away. That environmental consistency reinforces thematic stagnation. Nothing resets. And then the flood happens. Water finally overwhelms Gotham, not drizzle. Deluge. It's catastrophic, yes, but symbolically, it's the first genuine rupture in the system. Corruption can hide in shadows. It can't hide underwater. The arena collapse forces visibility. Civilians and criminals share the same drowning space. Hierarchies flatten in crisis. And Batman's response defines the film's thesis about civic responsibility. He doesn't vanish once the villain is captured. He doesn't retreat into shadow. He stays. He assists. He becomes infrastructural rather than punitive. The image of him helping the injured onto stretchers reframes heroism from spectacle to service. That shift parallels a broader evolution in how modern audiences interpret power. In earlier eras, strength was domination. Today, legitimacy comes from accountability, from transparency, from proximity to the people affected. Reeves seems aware of that cultural recalibration. Even the Riddler's online followers underscore civic fragility. They're not supervillains. They're isolated citizens radicalized by narrative. The film doesn't portray them as masterminds. It portrays them as lost. That's more unsettling, because it suggests Gotham's real enemy isn't one charismatic extremist. It's disillusionment at scale. Batman's realization isn't that he must fight harder. It's that he must inspire differently. That's a profound evolution for the character. Historically, Batman thrives in shadows. Fear is efficient. Fear is immediate. But fear doesn't build community. It enforces compliance. Hope, on the other hand, requires visibility. Which brings us back to that final flare sequence. The visual composition is telling. Batman walks ahead, partially illuminated, civilians following not because they're terrified, but because they trust him in that moment. The camera lingers. This isn't triumphant scoring. It's tentative faith. Gotham hasn't healed. It's submerged. But the symbol has shifted trajectory. And that interplay between city and vigilante suggests something larger about the genre itself. For years, superhero films leaned into escalation. Bigger threats, larger destruction, multiversal stakes. The Batman narrows focus back to municipal failure, corrupt funds, local elections, organized crime, street-level consequences. It's almost anti-spectacle in its priorities. That grounded scale may explain its resonance. Global catastrophe can feel abstract. Civic decay feels recognizable. And in choosing to anchor the narrative in institutional rot rather than cosmic peril, Reeves repositions Batman as urban myth rooted in policy and power dynamics, not just personal trauma, which leads to an even deeper layer worth exploring. If Batman is evolving from vengeance to stewardship, and Gotham is transitioning from hidden rot to exposed collapse, what does that mean for the future of this iteration? Because the film ends not with resolution, but with vulnerability. And vulnerability is narrative opportunity. Vulnerability is dangerous territory in franchise filmmaking. Studios prefer certainty, escalation, bigger villains, higher stakes. But the Batman ends on something far more fragile, moral recalibration. And that opens fascinating possibilities for where this iteration can go next. Because if Part 1 was about identity correction, Part 2 must logically interrogate ideology. Bruce has realized fear alone isn't enough. Fine. But what replaces it? Hope isn't a switch you flip. It's infrastructure. And infrastructure, especially in a city like Gotham, fights back. The flood leaves Gotham physically broken. But disasters don't just destroy, they create power vacuums. Organized crime splinters. Political seats open. Opportunists rise. The film quietly sets this up. Penguin isn't defeated, he's ascending. The old guard is gone. That vacuum invites evolution. Which means the sequel, thematically, cannot simply repeat detective noir. It must explore consequence. Here's the deeper question. Can a symbol built in darkness survive exposure? Bruce stepping into light at the end of the first film is powerful. But sustained visibility invites scrutiny. Gotham now sees him not just as myth, but as participant. And participation means accountability. If he becomes a public-facing force of hope, he risks losing the psychological edge that made criminals fear the shadows in the first place. That tension is fertile ground. And then there's Bruce Wayne, the man, not the suit. This version hasn't constructed the billionaire facade yet. He's emotionally stunted, socially withdrawn, but if he truly wants to change Gotham structurally, he cannot operate solely as a masked vigilante. He must engage institutions, which means building a public identity. That evolution may be the most difficult transformation of all. Playboy persona in previous iterations functioned as camouflage. In Reeves's world, it may need to become something else entirely: civic actor, philanthropic disruptor, visible counterweight to corruption, not fake charm, real engagement. That requires emotional growth. And emotional growth requires confronting his father's legacy in full. The first film cracks that door open. Allegations of Thomas Wayne's moral compromise destabilize Bruce's inherited righteousness. He ultimately rejects the worst interpretation. But doubt lingers. Legacy isn't static. It's contested memory. If Gotham's renewal fund was corrupted, then the Wayne name is partially implicated in systemic failure. Bruce can't just avenge that. He has to repair it. Now widen the lens. Superhero narratives traditionally escalate through physical antagonists. But what if the next phase of this saga escalates philosophically? Not bigger explosions. Bigger moral dilemmas. What happens when Gotham begins to depend on Batman in a way that undermines institutional reform? When citizens defer to vigilante justice rather than democratic process, hope can also become crutch. And this is where Reeves's grounded approach becomes narratively exciting. Because his world doesn't tolerate cartoonish extremity, it demands psychological realism. A villain in the sequel cannot merely challenge Batman physically. They must challenge his redefinition. Imagine an antagonist who weaponizes optimism, or one who exposes the limits of symbolic change, or one who understands that Bruce is still unfinished. The groundwork is there. The first film dismantled vengeance. The next could test hope. But let's zoom out further. Beyond sequel speculation. What the Batman may ultimately represent in genre history is a shift from invincibility fantasy to ethical evolution. Early 2000s superhero cinema often framed heroes as stable moral centers navigating chaotic worlds. Post-2010 storytelling complicates that stability. Heroes now question their impact. They confront unintended consequences. They evolve in response to miscalculation. Reeves's Batman fits squarely in that modern lineage. He is not the world's greatest detective because he solves riddles. He is becoming great because he investigates himself. That introspection separates this film from spectacle-driven counterparts. It positions the character as adaptable to cultural mood shifts. Batman, in this iteration, feels responsive to his era. Digital radicalization, institutional distrust, civic fragility, and perhaps that adaptability explains why the character endures across decades. He is elastic. Gothic in one era, militarized in another, noir in this one, but always anchored in trauma and response. So where does this leave the legacy conversation? If the first 12 parts of this analysis examined craft, performance, commerce, and reception, these extended chapters reveal something deeper. The Batman is less concerned with being definitive and more concerned with being developmental. It doesn't present the final form of the Dark Knight. It presents the apprenticeship of hope. And that's rare in blockbuster storytelling, because most franchises sell arrival. Reeves sells transition. The cave isn't complete. The city isn't saved. The man isn't whole. He's learning. And as long as the storytelling continues to prioritize evolution over escalation, this version of Batman may age in ways that feel increasingly relevant rather than dated. Darkness was the starting point. Responsibility is the direction. And the most compelling journeys aren't about defeating villains. They're about becoming better than the ideology that created them. If Reeves is selling transition rather than arrival, then the most radical thing the Batman does is refuse catharsis. Think about how most superhero films resolve tension. The villain is defeated. The city cheers. The hero stands framed against sunrise, morally affirmed. Closure. Reeves denies that comfort. Yes, the Riddler is captured. Yes, the immediate threat subsides. But Gotham is underwater. Infrastructure is shattered. The mayor-elect speaks about rebuilding, but her voice trembles with uncertainty. This isn't victory, it's triage. And that tonal decision repositions the entire film within modern blockbuster storytelling. It suggests that systemic damage cannot be punched into submission. It must be rebuilt, slowly, imperfectly, which leads to a deeper thematic layer we haven't fully explored yet: time. The Batman is obsessed with duration, long takes, lingering investigations, repeated hallway walks into the iceberg lounge, rain that never seems to stop. Even the runtime itself forces you to sit inside the atmosphere. That isn't indulgence, it's philosophy. Vengeance is immediate. Hope takes time. By structuring the film as a procedural rather than an action sprint, Reeves aligns audience experience with Bruce's transformation. You feel the weight of process. You feel exhaustion. By the time Batman carries that flare through floodwaters, the emotional shift feels earned because you've endured the grind with him. This temporal patience may be one of the film's most underappreciated achievements. In a content-saturated era where pacing accelerates to hold distracted attention, the Batman slows down deliberately. It trusts viewers to commit. That trust becomes part of its identity. Watching it feels less like consuming a product and more like entering an atmosphere. And atmosphere shapes memory. Years from now, specific plot mechanics may blur. But the mood, that oppressive, rain-soaked melancholy, will remain distinct. The film carves out sensory territory in the Batman canon that no previous version fully occupied. Burton's Gotham was gothic fantasy. Nolan's was metropolitan realism. Reeves's is decaying urban purgatory. Each reflects the anxieties of its era. Burton emerged from late 80s stylization and theatricality. Nolan responded to post-9/11 security paranoia. Reeves speaks to digital age distrust and institutional fatigue. That evolution isn't accidental. Batman adapts because cultural fear adapts. And that brings us to one final meta layer: myth elasticity. Few fictional characters endure across nearly a century while remaining relevant. Batman does because he isn't defined by powers. He's defined by reaction. He is trauma responding to context. Every generation projects its fears onto Gotham and reshapes the Dark Knight accordingly. Reeves's version strips away spectacle to ask a quieter question. What kind of symbol does this era need? Not invincibility. Accountability. Not dominance. Guidance. And perhaps that's why the final moments land with such restraint. The closing narration doesn't declare Gotham saved. It acknowledges uncertainty. The city is angry, scarred. But there's a subtle pivot: I have to become more. That sentence reframes the entire trilogy potential. Not, I will defeat more, I will become more. Growth as narrative engine. And here's the quiet brilliance: that growth doesn't invalidate the darkness that came before. It contextualizes it. Bruce needed to confront the limits of vengeance to discover its insufficiency. The Riddler wasn't just antagonist. He was mirror held too close. Which means the first film functions almost like thesis statement. It defines the problem. Future chapters, if they maintain thematic discipline, must explore application. How does hope operate in corrupt systems? How does visibility change power dynamics? How does a man rebuild identity without losing edge? Those are richer questions than who does he fight next. And that may be the ultimate gift of the Batman. It restores curiosity, not just about villains, about philosophy, about evolution, about whether a hero can outgrow the anger that created him. If it succeeds in continuing that trajectory, This saga won't just be another reboot cycle. It will be remembered as the era where Batman matured from mythic Avenger into ethical guardian. Still flawed, still human, still walking through rain, but no longer mistaking fear for purpose. And maybe that's the most enduring image of all. Not the cape spread wide, not the engine roaring, but a man holding a small red light in overwhelming darkness, choosing to guide instead of punish. Becoming. Always becoming. If we go deeper, we stop talking about Batman as a character and start talking about him as architecture. Because beneath the detective plot, beneath the trauma arc, beneath the civic metaphor, the Batman is structurally about reconstruction. The film begins with vertical imagery, skyscrapers, towers, elevated crime scenes, power concentrated above the city. Corruption flows downward. Renewal funds siphoned from the top. Political elites insulated from street consequence. Even Bruce operates from above, watching from rooftops, striking from elevated positions. Height equals distance, and distance equals disconnection. The flood reverses that geometry. Water flattens verticality. It erases hierarchy. Suddenly, everyone is at the same level, waiting, struggling, exposed. Gotham's skyline loses dominance. The city becomes horizontal, human, vulnerable. Batman's movement shifts with it. He descends. Earlier in the film, he emerges from shadows like myth. In the finale, he kneels beside survivors. He carries bodies. He helps strangers onto stretchers. Physically lower, emotionally closer. That spatial transition is not accidental. It's ideological choreography. Reeves stages transformation through geography. And that spatial storytelling connects to something even broader, control. For most of the runtime, Bruce believes control is achieved through force. Tight fists, direct action, interrogations under harsh lighting. But control is illusion in a decaying system. The Riddler proves that. One man with a grievance and internet access destabilizes the entire city. Control collapses. Response becomes necessary. And response requires adaptability. This is where the Batman becomes almost anti-authoritarian in tone. It doesn't glorify unilateral dominance. It questions it. Bruce's early approach mirrors authoritarian logic: impose fear, suppress crime. Efficient, simplistic. Simplistic. The film dismantles that approach. Because fear scales poorly, it radicalizes, it polarizes, it inspires countermyths. Hope, however fragile, invites cooperation. That ideological pivot makes this film feel distinctly modern. In earlier eras, Batman was fantasy of competence in a broken world. Reeves reframes him as participant in that brokenness. He is not outside the system. He is influenced by it, capable of miscalculation. That humanization repositions heroism as learning curve rather than fixed virtue. Now let's widen the lens again. If the Batman is about reconstruction, then it's also about authorship. Matt Reeves isn't just telling a story about Bruce Wayne redefining himself. He's redefining the franchise's grammar. He strips away excessive quipping, minimizes digital gloss, prioritizes texture over spectacle. The filmmaking language mirrors the narrative thesis: return to foundation. Slow down, examine structure, identify rot, rebuild. Even the sound design participates in this ethos. Silence is frequent, music is sparse and repetitive. There's patience in how scenes unfold. The film trusts atmosphere over exposition. In that sense, the Batman becomes a quiet rebellion against algorithmic blockbuster pacing. And here's the fascinating paradox. Its commercial success proves that audiences are willing to follow mood over momentum, which suggests something hopeful about viewers themselves. They didn't reject the slowness, they embraced it. That reception signals appetite for thematic weight within genre filmmaking. It hints that spectacle fatigue may not be about superheroes, it may be about superficiality. Reeves offers density. Now, let's talk about myth durability. Batman survives reinvention because he is conceptually modular. Trauma plus wealth, plus city, plus crime. That equation can be rearranged endlessly. Reeves's contribution is recalibrating the emotional variable. Instead of mythic certainty, he injects doubt. Instead of polished mastery, he gives us apprenticeship. Instead of dominance, development. And that subtle shift might echo further than we realize. Future superhero narratives may increasingly embrace ethical growth arcs rather than perpetual competence loops. The genre matures as its audience matures. So where does this leave us at the deepest layer? With a film that argues symbols are not static. They must evolve or become dangerous. Batman begins as vengeance, rigid, reactive, cathartic. He ends as possibility, uncertain, responsible, iterative. That's not just character growth. That's commentary on power. Power without reflection corrodes. Power with self-awareness adapts. And in an era saturated with loud declarations of strength, there's something quietly radical about a hero who ends his story admitting he must change. Not because he was defeated, because he learned. That's evolution. That's longevity. That's why this version of Batman doesn't feel like a replacement for previous ones. It feels like the next stage in a living myth. Still dark, still imperfect, still walking through rain, but now carrying light, not as weapon, but as invitation. If we're continuing, then we go into the deepest layer left untouched, mirrors. Because the Batman is obsessed with reflection, not just metaphorically, visually. Think about how often glass separates characters, interrogation rooms, car windows, club entrances, surveillance lenses, screens. Gotham is constantly viewed through something, distorted, filtered, refracted. Nobody sees anyone directly without mediation. That's not stylistic coincidence. It's commentary. Bruce doesn't confront criminals face to face as a man. He confronts them through a mask. The Riddler doesn't reveal himself openly. He broadcasts through a screen. Even political figures speak from podiums framed by media glare. Identity in this Gotham is always layered. The interrogation scene between Batman and the Riddler is the film's purest mirror moment. They're separated by glass, reflection overlapping reflection. For a split second, their faces almost merge in the surface. Hero and villain occupying the same plane. Reeves stages it deliberately. The Riddler screams with ecstatic recognition. "We did this together!" And for one terrifying beat, the audience feels the proximity. Not moral equivalence, ideological adjacency. Bruce thought he was singular. He wasn't. That moment fractures his self-concept. And that fracture connects to another recurring motif, eyes. This Batman is filmed closer to the eyes than any previous version. Pattinson's performance lives there. Exhaustion, doubt, fury. The cowl exposes more of his gaze than Bale's armored mask ever did. We see him thinking. We see him processing. The Riddler, conversely, hides his eyes behind thick glasses and a heavy mask for most of the film. When he finally removes it, his eyes are wide, vulnerable, almost childlike. It destabilizes expectation. The monster looks small. Reeves understands that eyes communicate ideology. Batman begins by hiding in darkness, letting criminals imagine him. Fear thrives in obscurity, but hope requires visibility. By the end, his face is partially illuminated while leading survivors. Not fully revealed, but not fully hidden either. That transition is visual psychology. Now let's talk about rain. Rain in cinema often signals cleansing or melancholy. Here, it's both, and neither. It doesn't purify Gotham, it saturates it. Rain blurs edges, softens outlines, makes every surface reflective. The entire city becomes a mirror. And in reflection-heavy environments, identity destabilizes. Bruce spends the entire film confronting reflections. Of his father, of his own ideology, of the Riddler's warped righteousness. The rain externalizes that introspection. Gotham isn't clear, it's refracted. Even the Batmobile chase plays with reflective chaos, headlights bouncing off wet asphalt, fire refracting through water droplets. Vision is compromised, control is slippery. That's not just aesthetic mood, it's thematic uncertainty. Reeves crafts a world where clarity must be earned, which brings us to masculinity. Batman has historically represented stoic dominance, controlled aggression, emotional suppression as strength. Reeves complicates that. Pattinson's Bruce is not hyper-confident. He's withdrawn, quiet, on edge. His masculinity isn't performative swagger. It's brittle self-containment. He doesn't flirt smoothly with Selina. He barely maintains eye contact. When Alfred is injured, Bruce's anger masks fear. He lashes out because vulnerability terrifies him more than violence. And here's what's radical. The film doesn't reward that repression. It exposes its cost. The adrenaline injection scene is key here. It's a moment of regression, pure rage overriding restraint, brutality escalating. The film frames it as frightening, not triumphant. Selina has to pull him back. Violence unchecked becomes monstrous. That visual communicates something quietly powerful. Masculinity untethered from empathy curdles. And by the end, Bruce's growth isn't about becoming stronger. It's about becoming accountable. Now, zoom out one last time. What makes the Batman endure isn't just craft or performance, it's coherence. Every layer, cinematography, sound, production design, editing, reinforces the same thesis: symbols evolve or they decay. Bruce evolves. Gotham is forced to confront itself. The audience sits in discomfort longer than typical blockbuster rhythms allow, and that discomfort becomes the film's signature. If Nolan's trilogy asked, "How does a hero survive chaos?" Reeves asks, "How does a hero avoid becoming part of it?" Different era, different anxiety, and that's why this version matters. Not because it's louder, not because it's darker, but because it's reflective. It understands that in the modern age, myths are scrutinized, deconstructed, debated in real time. A hero who doesn't interrogate himself risks irrelevance. This Batman interrogates himself, and that interrogation is the real detective story, not the riddles, not the murders, the identity. A man investigating the consequences of his own symbol, still unfinished, still adapting, still walking through rain, but now aware of what the reflection shows. If we continue now, we have to confront the comparison head-on, because no Batman discussion escapes Nolan's gravity. And the real difference between Christopher Nolan's trilogy and Matt Reeves's The Batman isn't tone, it's philosophy of control. Nolan's Bruce Wayne believes systems can be stabilized through calculated escalation. Batman Begins is about constructing fear strategically. The Dark Knight tests moral limits under chaos. The Dark Knight Rises restores order through sacrifice. The trilogy moves from instability, my pressure, my restoration. Reeves flips that arc. He starts in disillusionment. There is no illusion of control at the beginning of The Batman. Gotham is already rotten. Institutions are compromised. Bruce is already active and already wrong about his method. The story is not about building a symbol, it's about correcting one. Let's break this down structurally. Nolan's films escalate threats externally. The Joker tests ideology. Bane tests endurance. The villains push Batman to prove resilience. Reeves internalizes the threat. The Riddler does not try to break Batman physically. He tries to align with him. That's far more destabilizing. The horror isn't defeat, it's recognition. Nolan's Joker says, "You complete me," in a performative way, ideological rivalry. Reeves's Riddler says it like partnership. And that distinction shifts the narrative weight inward. Another difference, myth framing. Nolan presents Batman as a necessary myth in extraordinary times. Reeves questions what happens when myth is misinterpreted. In Nolan's world, Batman inspires police and citizens. In Reeves's world, he inspires extremists accidentally. That's a modern anxiety. Information ecosystems amplify symbols unpredictably. Influence travels faster than intention. The film subtly acknowledges that in a digital era, icons cannot control interpretation. Now consider Bruce Wayne's public identity. Christian Bale's Bruce masters duality. The Playboy persona is weaponized camouflage. He understands performance. Pattinson's Bruce hasn't learned performance at all. That's critical. Bale's Bruce is strategic. Pattinson's Bruce is raw, which means Nolan's arc is about sustainability of myth. Reeves's arc is about construction of self. Even their climaxes reveal philosophical divergence. In The Dark Knight, Batman takes the blame for Harvey Dent's crimes to preserve Gotham's hope. He chooses martyrdom to protect institutional faith. It's noble deception. In The Batman, Bruce chooses transparency of growth. He doesn't manipulate narrative, he alters behavior. It's honest recalibration. Nolan's hero sacrifices reputation. Reeves's hero reconstructs identity. Both powerful, but emotionally different. And then there's scale. Nolan escalates from crime boss to terrorist mastermind to citywide occupation. Each film increases magnitude. Reeves keeps the stakes municipal. No nuclear devices, no global countdown, just a corrupt city and a radicalized extremist. And that grounded scope feels deliberate. In a post-superhero saturation era, bigger isn't always better. Intimate threat can feel more plausible, and therefore more unsettling. Now let's briefly touch Burton and Snyder to complete the triangle. Burton's Batman lives in operatic Gothic exaggeration. Stylization over psychology. Iconography over realism. It's theatrical myth. Snyder's Batman is deified brutality. Older, hardened, operating in apocalyptic context. Anger calcified into cynicism. Redemption arrives through sacrifice logic. Reeves, by contrast, is pre-cynicism. His Bruce isn't world-weary, he's world-ignorant. He hasn't yet processed the complexity of the system he's fighting. That naivety is intentional. It allows growth. So what does this tell us? Every major Batman era reflects its cultural mood. Burton, stylized escapism at the end of the Cold War. Nolan, moral tension in a post-9/11 surveillance age. Snyder, existential dread in polarized geopolitical climate. Reeves, institutional distrust in the digital information era. That progression isn't accidental. Batman evolves because fear evolves. But here's the most interesting distinction of all. Nolan asks whether a hero can endure corruption without becoming corrupted. Reeves asks whether a hero can recognize corruption within himself. That's a psychological deepening of the myth. And psychologically complex heroes tend to age well, because introspection doesn't date as quickly as spectacle. Now imagine the long arc. If Reeves continues this thematic discipline, the trilogy could chart Film 1, Vengeance Corrected, Film 2, Hope Tested, Film 3, Symbol Institutionalized or Rejected. That's not escalation of explosions, that's escalation of ideology. And if executed carefully, it could become one of the most thematically cohesive superhero trilogies ever made, not because it gets louder, but because it gets wiser. Which brings us to the final frontier of this deep dive, legacy projection, not what the film is now, what it will mean in 15 years, because endurance is the ultimate critic, and the question isn't whether the Batman succeeded, it's whether it will mature alongside the audience that embraced it. 15 years from now, the conversation around the Batman won't start with box office numbers. It will start with tone. Because what endures in cinema isn't revenue. It's atmosphere. It's emotional architecture. It's how a film felt to inhabit. And the Batman feels distinct, not loud, not triumphant, not universe expanding, not universe expanding, brooding, patient, reflective. When we project forward, legacy depends on three things: thematic depth, aesthetic identity, and adaptability. Reeves's film scores unusually high in all three. First, thematic depth. Movies tied too tightly to contemporary trends age poorly. Films rooted in psychological truth tend to mature gracefully. Bruce's arc in this film isn't dependent on topical references. It's anchored in universal tension. How do you transform anger into responsibility? That question doesn't expire. The Riddler's online radicalization element is contemporary, yes, but the core idea of grievance weaponized by ideology predates the internet. The film situates itself in the digital age without becoming enslaved to it. That balance increases durability. Second, aesthetic identity. In 15 years, audiences may not remember exact plot beats, but they will remember rain. They'll remember red flare smoke drifting through floodwater. They'll remember boots echoing down dark hallways. They'll remember a Batmobile that sounded like restrained thunder. Iconography matters. Reeves crafted frames that already feel etched into the larger Batman visual canon, and strong iconography sustains cultural memory. Third, adaptability. If the sequels maintain philosophical progression rather than scale inflation, this trilogy could age similarly to Nolan's, not as a product of its era, but as a statement about it. But here's the crucial difference. Nolan's trilogy feels complete, a closed arc with defined endpoints. Reeves's story feels evolutionary. That gives it potential to breathe longer. If future installments explore institutional reform, public identity, and the ethical tension between vigilante action and civic participation, the trilogy could mature alongside its audience. Viewers who connected to the rawness of Year 2 Batman may later connect to the burden of a more public Bruce Wayne. That's generational storytelling. Now let's consider something more abstract: myth fatigue. Superhero cinema has entered a recalibration phase. Spectacle escalation reached saturation. Multiverses collided. Stakes inflated to cosmic absurdity. In that environment, the Batman feels almost countercultural. It shrinks scale. It slows rhythm. It prioritizes psychology over fireworks. If the genre continues trending towards self-awareness and restraint, Reeves's film may eventually be viewed as one of the pivot points, the moment the genre re-embraced texture over velocity. And then there's Pattinson. Performance longevity matters. Bale's Batman remains iconic because it captured a definitive psychological stance for its era. Pattinson's version may endure because it feels unfinished. There's room for growth, reinterpretation, deepening. He didn't deliver the definitive Batman, he delivered the transitional one. And transitional figures often resonate across time because they embody struggle rather than arrival. Now here's the deeper legacy layer: symbolism in unstable eras. Batman as a character thrives when society feels uncertain. Economic anxiety, political distrust, technological acceleration, these conditions produce appetite for mythic yet grounded figures. Reeves's Gotham mirrors that instability, which means the film may feel increasingly relevant whenever civic trust declines. It's a Batman built for fragile systems. And fragile systems are not disappearing anytime soon. But legacy also depends on rewatch value. Will audiences revisit it? The answer likely depends on mood. This isn't comfort cinema, it's immersion cinema. It requires attention. That could limit casual replay value, but enhance critical reappraisal. Films that demand patience often deepen over time, the ones that reveal new textures on repeat. And the Batman is layered. The reflections, the eyeline storytelling, the red saturation arc, the spatial descent from rooftops to floodwater. These details reward re-examination. Now let's address the final, unavoidable truth. Batman will be rebooted again. Someday. Another actor, another director, another interpretation. When that happens, Reeves's version won't be erased. It will sit alongside Burton's operatic Gothic, Nolan's moral epic, and whatever comes next. Its contribution? Psychological accountability. It reframed the character not as an unshakable symbol of justice, but as a symbol under revision. And, in a cultural era obsessed with deconstructing icons, that reframing may prove historically significant. So in 15 years, the conversation may sound like this. Remember when Batman stopped trying to be vengeance and started trying to be better? That's legacy, not dominance, not spectacle. Evolution. A hero who didn't just fight corruption, but examined his own reflection inside it. A trilogy that, if it stays disciplined, could become less about defeating villains and more about refining influence. And a film that dared to let its protagonist end, not with certainty, but with humility. Still imperfect, still learning, still walking through rain, but no longer mistaking darkness for destiny. If we're taking this to its deepest layer, then we stop analyzing the Batman as a film and start analyzing Batman as a generational myth. Because what Reeves really did wasn't just reinterpret a character, he updated a cultural function. In the 20th century, Batman represented control in chaotic cities. He emerged during economic depression. He thrived in crime wave paranoia. He symbolized individual competence in systems that felt overwhelmed. The fantasy was simple. One disciplined man could outthink corruption. That fantasy worked when institutions were flawed but not widely distrusted. The 21st century changed the equation. Post-9/11 narrative shifted towards surveillance ethics and moral compromise. Nolan captured that perfectly. Batman became a necessary lie, a strategic manipulator preserving fragile order. But now, we live in an era of information fragmentation, institutional skepticism, viral radicalization, public discourse splintered into echo chambers. The fear isn't just crime, it's distortion, and that's where Reeves's Batman lands. This isn't a hero solving chaos, it's a hero navigating misinterpretation. The Riddler doesn't rise because Gotham lacks a vigilante. He rises because symbols travel without context, because grievance finds community, because anger feels clarifying. That's modern myth anxiety. Reeves understands something crucial. In the digital age, icons are unstable. They can be co-opted, reframed, weaponized. So the question becomes, how does a myth survive reinterpretation? By evolving faster than the distortion. That's what Bruce does at the end of this film. He recognizes that fear alone scales dangerously, so he recalibrates, not perfectly, not completely, but consciously. And that self-awareness is the defining trait of 21st century heroism. Older myths were aspirational. They showed us who we should be. Modern myths are interrogative. They ask who we are becoming. The Batman is interrogative. It doesn't celebrate rage. It questions it. It doesn't present violence as cathartic triumph. It shows its ripple effects. It doesn't portray hope as naive. It portrays it as difficult. That difficulty is why the film feels grounded rather than escapist. Now zoom out even further. Why does Batman endure when other heroes fade? Because he is human. No powers. No cosmic origin. Just trauma, discipline, resources, and choice. And choice is endlessly adaptable. Reeves leans into that adaptability by stripping spectacle to reveal the psychological mechanism underneath. Batman isn't defined by gadgets here, he's defined by intention. That's timeless storytelling. If the 20th century Batman was about fear controlling crime, and the early 2000s, Batman was about fear containing chaos, Reeves's Batman is about fear examined. And examination is the language of our era. We deconstruct, we critique, we question motives, we analyze systems. A hero who refuses introspection feels outdated. A hero who interrogates himself feels aligned. That alignment may be this film's greatest long-term strength. Because myths survive when they adapt to collective anxiety. And our current anxiety isn't, who will save us? It's, can power be trusted? Reeves answers cautiously, only if it evolves. Now imagine decades from now, future filmmakers reinterpreting Batman again. They will look back at this era and see the tonal shift, the move from dominance to accountability, from spectacle to atmosphere, from certainty to growth. They may not replicate it, but they'll acknowledge it. And that's how myth builds layers. Each generation adds philosophy without erasing the last. Burton gave us operatic iconography. Nolan gave us moral chess. Reeves gives us psychological recalibration. All coexist, all necessary, but only one speaks directly to the instability of symbolic influence in the digital age. That's this one. And that may be why it feels less like a reboot and more like a response. Not just to previous Batman films, but to the world that watches them. A world saturated with noise, with anger monetized, with institutions questioned. In that world, a hero who learns publicly matters. A hero who admits evolution matters more. And that is where we finally land. The Batman isn't about defeating the Riddler. It's about refusing to become him. It's about recognizing that anger can inspire monsters and choosing to inspire something else instead. That's a mature myth. That's a modern myth. And if Reeves stays disciplined, this saga won't just be remembered as the darker reboot. It will be remembered as the moment Batman stopped being vengeance and started being responsible for what vengeance creates. Still human, still flawed, still walking through rain, but now aware that even shadows cast influence, and influence, once understood, becomes choice. Then we end where all enduring myths eventually land, on thresholds. Because The Batman is a film about crossing lines, physically, psychologically, symbolically. Watch how often Reeves frames characters in doorways. Bruce at the mayor's funeral, standing at the edge of public space but never fully entering it. Batman outside the Iceberg Lounge, pausing before descending into corruption. Selina on rooftops, hovering between escape and attachment. The Riddler behind glass, separated from the world he claims to represent. Thresholds everywhere. A threshold is not a destination, it's a decision point, and that's the architecture of this entire film. Bruce begins inside one threshold, vengeance as identity. It feels solid, certain, contained. But as the story unfolds, he's pushed repeatedly to the edge of that framework. Each revelation nudges him toward a crossing. The Riddler forces the confrontation, not through brute strength, through philosophical mirroring. We did this together. That line isn't accusation, it's invitation. The real climax of the film isn't the flood, it's refusal. Bruce refuses the invitation to remain vengeance, and that refusal is a crossing. Now look at the imagery of elevation one last time. Early Batman stands above Gotham, rooftops, gargoyles, overlooks, surveillance from height. He is apart from the city, judge, not participant. After the flood, he stands within Gotham, water at chest level, civilians clinging to him, no height advantage, no silhouette dominance. He descends. Descent in myth usually signals corruption or fall. Here, descent signals humility. That inversion matters, because humility is the rarest trait in modern mythmaking. Reeves understands that power without humility becomes spectacle, and spectacle without reflection becomes noise. So he constructs a Batman who is powerful, but not yet wise. Capable, but not yet mature. The film ends not on a rooftop. It ends at ground level. That's not coincidence. That's thesis. Now zoom out to the color red one final time. Red at the beginning signals violence. Neon clubs, emergency lights, blood against holiday decor. Red at the end becomes guidance, a flare cutting through floodwater. The same color transformed in meaning. That's symbolic evolution in visual form. Water, too, shifts meaning. Early rain obscures. Final flood exposes. It forces collective vulnerability. Gotham cannot hide behind vertical structures anymore. Everything is leveled. Leveling creates opportunity, and opportunity is where myth breathes. So what does all this synthesis reveal? That the Batman isn't about solving corruption. It's about understanding participation. Bruce thought he was outside the system. He learns he influences it. That awareness changes his trajectory. Modern audiences understand this instinctively. In a networked world, nobody is purely outside systems. Influence spreads, symbols ripple, intentions mutate. So a hero who becomes aware of his ripple effect feels contemporary. That's why this version resonates. Not because he's the strongest, not because he's the darkest, but because he's the most self-aware. And self-awareness is a 21st century survival trait. Now imagine watching this film decades from now. The rain will still fall, the flare will still glow, Pattinson's eyes will still carry that fractured intensity. But what may feel most powerful in retrospect is restraint. Reeves didn't rush growth. He didn't gift Bruce instant clarity. He gave him realization and left the work ahead. That's confidence in storytelling. Confidence that audiences will follow evolution rather than demand immediate perfection. And perhaps that's the final reason this film endures. It treats myth as process, not monument. Batman isn't carved in stone here. He's forged in repetition, in mistakes, in recalibration, and that makes him feel alive. Still walking, still adjusting, still choosing. Not a god above Gotham, a man within it. Carrying light not because he mastered darkness, but because he finally understood it.